Aiden, thank you so much for joining me on Misunderstood. I know you are a very busy man right now.
I'm a little bit busy, but thanks for having me on, Rachel.
So explain to our listeners why you have the name Turtle Boy, please.
So I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts, and there's a statue in downtown Worcester that's kind of like our most famous landmark. For those of you who are familiar, Worcester is it's like the second biggest city in New England. So it's like a little bootleg Boston. And it's a little small townish, and it's just this funny statue that's very Worcesterish. It's a boy who appears to be having sex with a turtle. And if you Google the Turtle Boy statue, it'll come up, and it looks like he's like having unconsensual sex with this turtle. The turtle appears to be screaming, but he's supposedly the artist said he's like releasing the turtle into the wild or riding it. That's why we call my followers turtle riders. But it's just a funny statue that I, being a Worcester boy, that I came up with about when I first made this blog that I started a little over 10 years ago. I'm like, what am I going to call it? And what better than Turtle Boy?
Oh my God, how funny. Okay, so I want our listeners to understand who you are. Where the hell did you come from? Because out of nowhere during this Karen retrial, I feel like you've really blown up. So for those of us who didn't know you before, just give me a little bit of your background.
So I used to be a high school teacher. I was a high school teacher for about 10 or 11 years. And I started blogging there's a website I created called EdenFromWorcester.com. And my opinions on there were controversial because I kind of have a potty mouth sometimes. And I ended up getting suspended for 5 days without pay as a teacher. And I was like on really thin ice about getting terminated because you can't have controversial opinions as a teacher. So I shut down EdenFromWorcester.com and I started an anonymous website called TurtleBoySports.com because if they couldn't prove it was me, then, I could say whatever I want. The problem is that the blog got very popular pretty quickly in 2014, especially in the Worcester County area. And another blogger from Buffalo, New York, found out who I was after we went to a game there and watched the Patriots kick their ass as they do every year. And I wrote a blog, kind of making fun of Buffalo fans because, we win and we had Tom Brady and, they were just foul fans. Buffalo fans are crazy. So, but in a good way, it was in a playful way. I made fun of them. And anyway, a blogger up there found out who I was, doxed me, and a whole bunch of people started contacting my school. And I kind of had to make a choice at that point. Like when the school found out I was Turtle Boy, like either, give it up or do this full time. And so, because you can't do both, you couldn't be a teacher and Turtle Boy at the same time. And I chose to just take a big chance. They, I wasn't fired or anything like that. They couldn't fire me because I hadn't done anything fireable. So they basically said they gave me a year's salary to just walk away. And, they wouldn't contest unemployment or anything like that. And I just took a chance. I quit a good job with a good pension. That was a very secure life as a teacher. And I decided to take a shot at being Turtle Boy and turn it into a business. And ever since then, I've written a book called I Am Turtle Boy in 2019. It kind of documents all the troubles I've had, with boycotts and being, shut down on social media. I've lost like hundreds of Twitter and Facebook accounts over the years. Every time I get a following over 100,000, they would, take away my accounts. I was banned from Twitter for like 2 or 3 years until Elon Musk bought the platform, and now I'm back with a vengeance. I've overcome. I've been sued more times than I can count. Won every time in court, and I had a pretty large following. Like I would get about 2 million page views roughly a month on my website, tbdailynews.com. And then the Karen Reed case happened. So I had a pretty big following. It was mostly localized. I would say like 80% probably from the New England area. But now with the Karen Reed case, this story has gone international. Like my audience is no longer primarily from the Boston area. So it's definitely blown up.
So were primarily covering local sports at the beginning and then somehow you transitioned into crime? Or was the Karen Reed case the first time you really got involved in something local that had such a big following and network?
I don't know why I call it Turtle Boy Sports. Maybe just it was catchier. I never wrote about sports like ever. I like sports, but I never wrote about it. And it doesn't sell. Like if I wrote an article about sports, no one would read it. No one cares about sports. They can listen to sports talk radio for that. So what I became known for is my investigative journalism. And I would, do little exposés around here about corruption and, the local government in Worcester or whatever with nonprofit fraud, and I kind of moved my wings to the Boston area and wrote about, corruption going on with this woman named Monica Cannon Grant, who's now facing federal charges. So I've done a lot of stories where I've investigated corruption and exposed things that the mainstream media has ignored. And two of my biggest stories involved the state police, ironically. In 2017, there was a woman who got arrested for driving under the influence of heroin, and she was the daughter of a judge. And she offered the arresting trooper a blowjob in exchange for leniency. And he included that in the report, and it was really embarrassing for her father, who was a judge. So the district attorney, who's friends with the judge, called the state police and said, "You got to redact that line. It's embarrassing for her." And the trooper refused. Who, ironically, this trooper's from Canton, as it would turn out. But the trooper refused to redact anything in it, and he got disciplined for it. And so a bunch of angry troopers contacted me. They showed me the before and after reports. And I wrote about it, and it ended up being called Troopergate, and it had massive waves. The governor had to respond to it, and the highest ranking members of the state police, including the colonel, had to resign in disgrace. And then 3 months later, in 2018, there was another story about the state police. I found out that a female trooper named Leah Genduso, who they were using kind of for like publicity campaigns to get women to join the force. She had one of the canine cops. So she was like on billboards and stuff like that, a real self-promoter. And I found out that I obtained court documents showing that Leah Genduso was previously investigated by the state police in 2013 or 14 because she and her boyfriend were doing a drug dealing ring, and they got caught. And in order to save herself, she turned state witness for the federal government. Actually, the U.S. Attorney's Office ended up getting involved. And 5 years later, she got hired by the same state police that investigated her. And how did she get on? Well, she was dating the Lieutenant Colonel, Danny Ristine, who was also tied to the Ali Bebo scandal that I just mentioned. And she ended up getting canned. And no one else got in trouble for that. No, like the people who actually hired her and passed her along, and it never got held responsible. And it's very similar to what I'm dealing with now with the Karen Reed case, where it appears like Michael Proctor is just going to take the fall for this. But like all the people who knew about Michael Proctor's antics along the way are going to say, "Oh my goodness, that's so horrible. I can't believe that is so appalling." I'm like, they all knew. They all knew what Michael Proctor was doing. They all knew he was a scumbag. So the Karen Reed case is similar to a lot of stories that I have covered in the past, but I don't know if it's because of the activism that's become involved in it and the protesting. It certainly got significantly more attention than any story I've ever published.
Right. And you talk about corruption, and you obviously brought to light to some of those things. I want to just give our listeners an idea of the corruption that is sort of rumored to be in the police in Boston. I mean, we kind of see it in a lot of movies. It's depicted that way. But living there, what is the reality of how people feel about the police department? Years ago with Black Lives Matter, there was obviously a big push for police reform. And I was kind of on the other side of that issue. I backed the blue, right? I trusted the police because my interactions with the police up until recently have been pretty positive, and because I have a lot of friends that are cops, and I trust police. I trust that when I call the local police department, they're going to do their job. And from my experience, that's usually been the case. So I've, traditionally backed the blue, but I understand that not everyone has the same experiences with the cops. But when this story came along, I would say that most people, and that's ultimately what we're fighting against here, right? Is that like, I'm a back the blue guy. And here I am leading this crusade against police corruption, and which kind of gives me more legitimacy because I'm not traditionally like the person that would be on the other side of this. Right. And so I find that most of the detractors that we have are people who just instinctively will believe the police are incapable of what I've and Karen Reed have accused them of doing. And that is covering up a murder of another Boston police officer.